In this video, I'm going to help you understand how to complete the Voltaic Cells lab report quiz. And I'm starting on the left-hand side of my courses. When you're under course content, you have at the bottom this lab reports tab, and part of that is Voltaic Cells. So if you click on the lab reports in Voltaic Cells, it brings up two files here. You should look at the first one before you start the actual lab report. It'll help you understand what's going on, and also read the instructions here. Let's open this and see what that image is. See, it pops up with an image here of an electrochemical cell using two beakers as half cells, and this system has both zinc and copper in it. It's a reaction between zinc and copper ion, just like in your lab report is going to be. However, there's a slight difference. Lab manual, and if you scroll down in the lab manual through all this first stuff, it has an experimental procedure here which takes you through doing this, taking some measurements on an electrochemical cell that's similar to the one pictured here, but it's not exactly identical, because the way we were going to do it in the lab was a simplification of this system. The simplification comes about because in the lab what we were going to do is take a piece of filter paper, which is what's outlined here, and on the piece of filter paper place solutions of zinc 2+ and copper 2+. Those would take the place of these two half cells over here. So with that setup, then in the experiment we would have attached a meter where the negative terminal of the meter would have been attached to the zinc, and the positive terminal of the meter would be measuring voltage. It's a voltmeter, would be connected to the copper. In this picture they don't have a meter. Instead they have a light bulb, which would just show that there would be current going from the zinc to the copper if this reaction took place. But for us, that instead of a light bulb, that's replaced here by the meter itself. This first part up here, the recorded data, would have had our values from the meter listed here in for 4 different combinations of solutions. And on the first part there, these are called standard cells because each of these would have been 1 molar concentration. And for the zinc and copper, the 1 molar is filled in here, but they're not for the rest, because you were to have decided which one of the others was the anode versus the cathode. For the next one, for the lead copper, you would have to decide which one is the anode, which one's the cathode, based on the half reaction voltages for the copper and the lead. Now in the actual lab report quiz, I show you the reaction in the forward direction, so I kind of do that for you as well. So that's what these tables are for, at least this first one. In my lab report quiz, I'm actually not going to be showing any actual data, so you guys won't have to do anything with the data that would have been recorded, but you will have to do this bottom part here, calculated data. Okay, so the lab report quiz is really all in here in the calculated data. In this lab report form, there's SCs and NCs. SC stands for standard cell and NC for non-standard cell. So the standard cell would correspond to the situation where you have 1 molar concentrations, which was the top table here. Okay, so like this first line would correspond to the situation here, with the zinc and the copper both being 1 molar. But instead of a experimental value for the voltage, you're going to be calculating the voltage, so that you're going to do the calculated voltage. Now the measured voltage, there is a column for that, but all these values would just be the same as this last column, just copying them over again. But we're not going to have that data, so we don't need to worry about that or this whole column. We're not going to be filling this column in at all. But we will be filling this one in with calculations. We also are not going to be doing differences or percent differences for this experiment, since I'm not going to be giving you any actual data. Lab report quiz, you're going to be calculating all of these values. So we're going to talk about how you do that. I'm going to go up in the lab report, in your lab manual here, and show you how, first of all, you'd come up with 1.1 volts for this one. That was already done for you, but we'll be able to see where that came from if we go up to that table of reduction potentials above here. So let me scroll up there. And what we're going to do, you identify the half reactions that are involved in whatever system you're looking at. In this case, it'd be the copper and the zinc. And if you scroll up a little further, there's the formulas that you use for these. We're talking about calculating the standard cell potential, which means we would be using either you can use either this formula or the one below it. The one below it takes the numbers directly off of the table of reduction potentials. So that's the one I'm going to be showing you, is this one right here, where both the E0 of the cathode and E0 of the anode, they're both reductions. Okay, so here's the zinc and here's the copper. Those are the two entries. So we're going to be working with this number and this number. Now if you remember, the formula that was up above has you first put in the cathode reduction potential, which in this case would be the copper, because copper is our cathode. Remember, copper would be the cathode here. And then you subtract from that the E0 reduction of the anode. So we're calculating E standard. I can't do an E0 here, so I'm just going to use the STD for standard potential, equals the E reduction of the cathode minus the E reduction of the anode. And for this particular system, the zinc copper, that would be equal then to 0.34, and that's in units of volts, minus, now the E reduction up here for the zinc is a minus 0.76, so that would be minus a negative 0.76 volts again. Okay, so you're basically adding 0.34 and 0.76, and that's where the 1.10 comes from. Okay, so that's how you get the voltage for the standard zinc copper cell. Right here. The next thing in the table, though, is to do the non-standard. Okay, now that would depend on which solutions you pick. I'm going to go back up and look at the example that's actually given in the lab manual. It's not, this is not any of the systems you guys are actually working with, but it's chromium and nickel reacting. So if you have solid chromium reacting with nickel ion to produce solid nickel and chromium, then if you have them in the correct order, you do get a positive voltage. And in all these, if the cell's going to be spontaneous, it has to give you a positive voltage, and you get 0.48 here. So that's for the standard for that example. Now for the non-standard, if you change one of these concentrations, either the nickel or the chromium, so that it's not 1 molar anymore, you can calculate the non-standard potential using the Nernst equation. And that's what you're going to be doing in this experiment. The Nernst equation is listed right here. And for the Nernst equation, you still need the standard cell potential, this one, which we calculated here already. So that goes in there, and then you subtract this whole expression here, which is RT over NF ln of Q. Q here is the reaction quotient. So Q is always products over reactants. So the value of Q here would be the product chromium solution concentration divided by the reactant, the nickel concentration, cubed, okay, because there's a 3 in front of it here. So that would be 1 squared divided by 0.1 cubed, and that gives you a value of Q having a value of 1,000. So 1,000 is what this number here goes into the Nernst equation, which they show you the Nernst equation here again underneath. So that 1,000 is going to go right there, and then they put the numbers in. You can see that they have 1,000 right there in that location. Okay, so when you fill in the numbers, you have your 0.48 that you calculated up here. That comes first, right there. And then you have minus the RT. So the R is this whole thing, including the units. This reaction is assumed to be at 25 degrees centigrade, so that's the T. And then that's divided by N times F. The N here, sometimes that's a little challenging to get. In order to figure out the N, you have to have a balanced chemical equation, which then tells you how many electrons altogether are transferred. So the N here is that number right there, the 6. That's the N value for this one. And then the last number here is just Faraday's constant. That's always the same number. And for the Q, natural log of Q, they put in 1,000. So if you put all those numbers in, then you get for this whole expression, RT over NF ln Q, it comes out to be 0.03. So you end up then with 0.48 minus 0.03, and you get a reduced voltage, which makes sense because anytime you reduce the concentration of the reactant, which is what you're doing in this case, your voltage is going to go down. Reports. Okay, so we're under Voltaic cells, and now we'll start the lab report. The quiz itself repeats this table, gives you that table again, and you're going to be using these numbers throughout the quiz. First thing it asks you to do is calculate the cell potential for the zinc copper cell, that combination, when you have 1 molar concentrations. Okay, well, that's the same as saying that we have a standard cell, because 1 molar means standard. So we already did that calculation, and it's asking for this number right here, this 1.1. Before you start the quiz, you can go ahead and do all the standard ones, because you know that they're just going to be cathode minus anode half potentials. You can do all those before you start the quiz, because you're going to be asked for all those eventually. The non-standard ones you can't do till you start the quiz, because you don't know ahead of time what the concentrations are going to be. They're kind of randomized, like I said. 1.10 volts. Okay, so that's just repeating that calculation I showed you before. Okay, and then the next question here in the quiz is, what is the anode in the cell described above? And that also is already identified for you right here. It shows you, like I pointed out before, it shows you that the zinc is under the anode column, and that's the answer they're looking for here. So that's the zinc. So I gave you the first 2 answers there already.